Let's get directly into the surprise that changed everything. The wrong turn. Aiden Rivers was absolutely not the highly specific type entirely of elite man who highly carelessly ended completely up, entirely, in the highly wrong place. Absolutely every single highly precious minute, entirely of his massive day, was highly strictly scheduled, meticulously monitored, and highly aggressively optimized completely by a highly elite team entirely of highly terrified assistants who profoundly knew that it was significantly better, absolutely not, to highly pathetically improvise. But exactly that, highly specific afternoon, his elite chauffeur had highly accidentally taken a highly wrong exit, completely off the massive highway entirely. Due, completely, to a highly sudden, last-minute traffic diversion. And entirely instead, entirely, of confidently arriving, directly at a highly high-profile, exclusive corporate dinner, entirely at a luxury hotel, completely downtown. Aiden highly unexpectedly successfully found completely himself, confidently standing perfectly outside a highly small, completely hidden Italian family restaurant that visually looked exactly as if it absolutely hadn't been highly successfully renovated entirely in at least exactly 2 agonizing decades. He was completely, utterly ready to highly aggressively demand to actively leave. But absolutely something highly massive violently stopped him. Perhaps it was officially the highly flickering, cheap neon sign entirely in the large window. Perhaps the highly delicious aroma entirely of hot garlic bread that beautifully floated completely in the freezing air. Or perhaps, exactly, although he would absolutely never, ever highly courageously admit it, the massive, crushing weight entirely of the absolute exhaustion that he absolutely had not highly generously permitted completely himself to physically feel entirely in agonizing years. He highly abruptly ordered the elite chauffeur to highly patiently wait and confidently entered completely alone. The small restaurant was incredibly warm and highly noisy. A highly familiar, chaotic place, completely with highly mismatched tablecloths, cheap candles that had absolutely already burned completely halfway down, and the highly loud, pure laughter entirely of innocent children beautifully bouncing completely off the hard walls. He highly casually chose a highly quiet seat, perfectly next, completely to the large window, aggressively pulled completely out his expensive phone, and highly aggressively planned to rapidly answer highly urgent corporate emails completely before confidently stepping completely back out. The highly chaotic atmosphere absolutely was not his highly elite style. It was way too incredibly alive, way too incredibly messy, but absolutely still, absolutely something highly profound entirely in it, highly aggressively, actively made him completely, violently, pause. He was exactly halfway completely through highly actively typing a highly critical message, exactly when he highly clearly heard a highly sudden, beautiful explosion entirely of pure laughter directly behind him. He rapidly looked completely up, highly instinctively, his piercing eyes highly aggressively scanning the highly noisy room completely until they completely, violently, stopped entirely on a highly messy table perfectly near the absolute center. It was exactly then that he vividly saw her, Scarlett. It highly agonizingly took him exactly 1 highly freezing second to successfully process it. She was significantly older exactly now, a highly tiny bit, but she absolutely still remained completely, unmistakably, The exact same highly thick, beautiful dark hair. Exactly now highly messily gathered entirely in a highly loose, simple braid. The exact same highly graceful, beautiful movements. The highly specific way she beautifully tilted her delicate head, exactly when she highly intensely listened to absolutely someone actively speak. And then, he vividly saw exactly what heavily surrounded her. Exactly 3 highly energetic young children. Absolutely all, completely with highly dark brown hair and highly piercing, surprisingly bright blue eyes. Exactly one was highly enthusiastically actively attempting to flawlessly balance a highly cheap breadstick perfectly on his tiny nose. Exactly another happily played, completely, with a highly broken crayon. The absolute third enthusiastically talked so incredibly fast that she was actively highly struggling to highly successfully actively keep completely up, completely with him. Aiden physically felt exactly as if his massive heart had completely, violently fallen directly to the hard floor. He intensely observed. Completely, utterly incapable, entirely of violently tearing his piercing gaze completely away. Exactly. As exactly one entirely of the innocent children slowly looked completely up and loudly laughed. And it was officially his exact, absolute laugh. His highly exact, precise laugh. The exact same highly beautiful one that his highly toxic mother absolutely used to highly sharply point completely out exactly when he was a highly innocent child. The heavy breath completely, violently, stuck entirely in his dry throat. He smoothly leaned incredibly slightly, completely forward, violently narrowing his piercing eyes, highly desperately attempting to miraculously convince completely himself that exactly this, absolutely, was not exactly what it so incredibly, highly clearly, visually appeared. But it absolutely was. He could highly clearly, vividly see it entirely, in the highly specific shape, entirely of their beautiful faces. In the highly exact contour entirely of their tiny jaws. In their piercing blue eyes that were highly perfect, absolute mirrors entirely of absolutely his. They absolutely were not absolutely just highly innocent children. They were officially his. The massive, blinding shock was so incredibly, highly profound that it completely, violently, silenced absolutely everything completely else, completely inside him. Absolutely all the highly toxic anger he had, exactly once fiercely felt, completely toward her. Absolutely all the highly agonizing, unanswered massive questions. The highly brutal way she had completely, violently disappeared. Completely from his massive life, exactly 3 agonizing years. Completely ago. Completely without exactly one single, highly pathetic explanation. Absolutely all entirely of it. Violently rushed completely back, directly in exactly one, highly massive, crushing wave. But exactly now, it was completely, highly painfully entangled, completely with absolutely something significantly, infinitely more, highly powerful. Absolute, total incredulity, and absolutely something highly dangerously, incredibly close, completely, to massive pain. Scarlett absolutely had not vividly seen him completely yet. She was happily helping exactly one entirely of the young boys meticulously cut a highly hot meatball perfectly in exactly half. Her beautiful expression incredibly soft and highly patient. Completely, utterly unaware, entirely, of the highly violent storm actively raging absolutely, just a highly few short meters, completely away. He literally could not physically move. He literally could not successfully breathe. He literally could not genuinely believe that the exact beautiful woman, completely with whom he had exactly once highly beautifully imagined, highly aggressively building a highly massive future, was peacefully sitting entirely on the absolute other side, entirely, of the highly noisy room. Heavily surrounded completely by a highly beautiful future that had highly clearly, miraculously, successfully happened, completely, without him, and entirely, in exactly that highly terrifying moment. Aiden Rivers, the highly untouchable, multi-billionaire elite CEO, profoundly felt absolutely something he had absolutely not miraculously felt entirely. In agonizing years, absolute, pure impotence. Aiden just found out he has triplets. If you were him, would you confront Scarlett right now or leave and process it? Tell us below. The silent collision. Aiden sat completely, utterly frozen. Completely, with his heavy pulse violently beating entirely in his terrified ears, entirely, while a highly massive million highly complex thoughts violently collided and catastrophically crashed completely inside his brilliant mind. He literally could not completely stop. Intensely looking directly at Scarlett and the exactly 3 innocent children, completely with a highly specific kind, entirely of highly dazed, toxic attachment. Exactly as if his highly brilliant brain absolutely had not successfully grasped exactly what his piercing eyes absolutely already profoundly knew. For a highly powerful man who highly rigidly lived entirely in highly absolute absolutes, in highly cold numbers, and highly toxic control, and absolute certainty. The highly explosive scene perfectly in front, entirely of him, completely, violently, broke absolutely, something entirely in the highly absolute foundations, entirely of his absolute very being. They vividly looked exactly like him. Absolutely all highly massive 3, the exact same highly dark hair, the exact same highly piercing blue eyes, the exact same highly subtle expressions that he highly flawlessly recognized entirely in his absolute own self exactly when he intensely looked directly in the massive mirror. There was absolutely zero highly pathetic way entirely to highly toxically deny it. These absolutely were not, absolutely, just highly innocent children. They were officially his biological sons. And she had absolutely never, ever explicitly told him. He intensely watched exactly as Scarlett gently wiped the highly dirty mouth entirely of exactly one young boy. Completely with a highly cheap napkin and highly softly scolded. Absolutely another entirely, for highly mischievously actively attempting to highly dangerously crawl completely under the highly messy table. She visually looked incredibly tired, but absolutely not completely exhausted. There was a highly quiet, absolute strength entirely in her. The highly specific kind, entirely of absolute strength, that he intimately remembered. The highly exact one that had highly violently attracted him and highly aggressively pushed him completely away, completely, at the exact same, highly agonizing time, entirely in the highly toxic past. He highly desperately attempted to successfully connect the highly brand new version entirely of her he vividly saw exactly now completely with the highly tragic memory, entirely of the beautiful woman who had completely, violently, walked completely out, entirely of his massive life, exactly 3 agonizing years completely ago, completely without a highly single, heavy word, entirely of pathetic explanation. She had simply, completely vanished. One poor, highly beautiful day, they were loudly laughing entirely on his highly massive balcony, happily sharing highly cheap takeout food, and highly playfully talking entirely about highly ridiculous, funny names, entirely for highly hypothetical babies, entirely for a highly massive future that they highly happily joked completely about. The absolute next, highly agonizing day, she was completely gone, completely without a highly pathetic note, completely without a highly tragic goodbye. Absolutely only highly deafening, toxic silence. He had highly frantically searched completely for her, highly expensively hired highly elite private investigators, highly aggressively pulled massive strings, highly urgently made highly confidential calls. Her highly modest apartment was completely empty, the cheap phone completely disconnected, the highly pathetic bank accounts completely closed. It was exactly as if she had completely, violently evaporated completely into thin air. Exactly. That had completely, violently destroyed absolutely something highly massive entirely inside him. Absolutely something highly vulnerable, highly hopeful, highly human. After exactly that, he highly aggressively buried completely himself, entirely in highly exhausting work, highly aggressively grew the massive company, successfully earned his absolute first, exactly $100 million, highly expensively bought a highly luxurious penthouse, highly meticulously built a highly massive corporate brand, so incredibly, highly powerful, that absolutely no one fiercely dared entirely to highly intrusively ask entirely about the highly toxic past. But the absolute brutal truth was that he had absolutely never, ever completely stopped highly agonizingly wondering exactly what had highly tragically happened completely to her. And exactly now, he profoundly knew. She absolutely had not entirely just highly cowardly left. She had violently taken his biological sons completely with her. His highly primal instinct was entirely to violently storm completely over. Highly aggressively demand absolute answers. Highly violently raise his deep voice. But absolutely something highly massive violently stopped him. Perhaps it was the highly beautiful way exactly one entirely of the innocent children gently took her soft hand, and she highly instinctively, fiercely squeezed it completely back. Perhaps it was the highly beautiful ease completely with which she flawlessly navigated her highly chaotic, massive chaos. Or perhaps it was the highly strange and incredibly unusual, massive ache violently spreading entirely in his heavy chest. The massive, crushing weight entirely of highly precious, lost time. Finally, exactly as if she highly magnetically, physically felt the highly terrifying intensity entirely of his piercing gaze, she smoothly turned her beautiful head and vividly saw him. Their piercing eyes violently met, and the absolute, precise moment their highly intense gazes violently crossed, the absolute entire, highly noisy room physically seemed to completely, violently stop. Her fragile body completely, violently tensed, completely instantly. Her beautiful eyes violently opened completely wide. For exactly one highly microscopic fraction entirely of a highly terrifying second, she vividly looked exactly like absolutely someone actively seeing a highly terrifying ghost. Her soft lips incredibly slowly parted, exactly as if she were actively going to explicitly say absolutely something. But absolutely zero heavy words successfully came completely out. He incredibly slowly stood completely up, his piercing eyes violently following her exactly as he confidently walked directly toward her highly messy table. The innocent children absolutely did not highly astutely notice him completely at absolute first. They were way too incredibly highly busy, highly energetically actively fighting completely over the highly broken crayons. But Scarlett absolutely did not physically move. She absolutely did not successfully breathe. He completely stopped exactly a highly few short meters, completely away. Scarlett! Her beautiful name violently came completely out, entirely of his dry mouth, exactly like a highly heavy stone. Incredibly heavy. Highly real. The highly sharp sound entirely of him actively made her violently flinch, absolutely just a highly tiny, microscopic bit. "Aiden," she whispered incredibly softly. Her beautiful voice was incredibly different. Absolutely still, incredibly soft. But exactly now heavily loaded, completely with highly thick layers, entirely of massive exhaustion. And absolutely something completely else. Absolute guilt. He intensely looked directly at the innocent children. They were absolutely still, way too incredibly highly distracted, entirely, to highly astutely realize exactly what was highly actively happening. But Aiden literally could not violently tear his piercing eyes completely away, entirely from them. He highly subtly pointed directly at them. She nodded fiercely, completely without highly toxic lies, completely without highly pathetic hesitation. Yes, absolutely all the heavy air completely, violently abandoned his strong body. The absolute truth was exactly right, perfectly there. Completely, utterly undeniable. "I highly genuinely think we absolutely should actively talk," he stated. Literally barely successfully keeping his deep voice highly incredibly firm. Scarlett intensely looked directly at the innocent children, then directly at him. Her fragile shoulders aggressively straightened exactly as if she were actively preparing completely for highly brutal impact. "Yes," she stated incredibly quietly. "We absolutely should. Aiden and Scarlett are finally about to talk. What do you think her excuse will be for hiding his sons? Tell us your theories." The truth revealed. Scarlett confidently walked completely out, absolutely first. Her highly cautious movements incredibly careful, exactly as if absolutely every single, highly deliberate step heavily carried a highly completely different, massive weight. Exactly now that her highly massive secret was absolutely no longer completely hers alone. Aiden aggressively followed her, his brilliant mind violently spinning completely out of control, his highly toxic thoughts incredibly loud and completely unfiltered, entirely in the highly heavy silence perfectly between them. The heavy door entirely of the highly noisy restaurant smoothly closed completely behind them, flawlessly muffling the highly warm warmth and the pure laughter entirely of the highly happy family securely inside. Outside, the freezing air physically felt significantly sharper, incredibly heavy, highly real entirely, in a highly specific way that actively made it incredibly difficult to successfully breathe. They stood perfectly still, perfectly near the highly cold edge entirely of the busy sidewalk. Exactly just completely out, entirely of the highly clear sight, entirely of the large restaurant windows. Scarlett aggressively crossed her soft arms incredibly tightly, completely over her fragile chest, her strong back incredibly straight, her delicate chin incredibly, slightly highly raised, exactly like, absolutely someone actively preparing entirely for a highly brutal fight that she profoundly knows she absolutely cannot highly possibly win, but actively has to highly bravely endure, absolutely anyway. Aiden, entirely on the absolute other hand, absolutely did not actively speak completely immediately. He simply intensely looked directly at her beautiful face, her piercing eyes, the exact same highly beautiful ones that he absolutely used to highly meticulously memorize exactly when the massive world profoundly felt way too incredibly highly complicated. She visually looked significantly older, absolutely not entirely in a highly terrible way, significantly more beautifully rooted. But there was absolutely something highly massive entirely in her piercing eyes that had absolutely not actively been perfectly there, completely before. A highly profound sadness, or perhaps absolutely just agonizing years entirely of highly brutal survival. He absolutely did not actively ask the highly obvious massive questions. Absolutely not completely yet. The absolute truth was way too incredibly raw, way too incredibly exposed. So he aggressively began completely, with absolutely something significantly softer. Exactly, although it absolutely still violently burned his dry throat. Why exactly didn't you explicitly tell me? Scarlett rapidly blinked exactly once, incredibly slowly. Because I was completely, utterly terrified, she stated. Entirely of you, entirely of your highly massive world, entirely of exactly how incredibly, highly fast, absolutely everything was actively moving exactly when I horrifyingly found completely out. He aggressively clenched his sharp jaw, highly desperately attempting absolutely not to highly generously let the highly toxic anger violently rise so incredibly fast, completely terrified entirely of exactly what, highly specifically, that I absolutely wouldn't fiercely want them? No, she stated incredibly rapidly. I profoundly knew that you absolutely would. I profoundly knew that you would absolutely be perfectly there, and that you would highly aggressively assume absolute responsibility, and that you would completely turn your massive life highly, completely upside, completely down, exactly that if it was highly necessary. And exactly that is exactly what completely terrified me, the absolute most. That highly unexpected answer completely, violently, took him completely by massive surprise. So, you frantically fled entirely because you highly genuinely thought I would fiercely care way too incredibly much? Scarlett heavily exhaled. I frantically fled entirely because I honestly did not completely know exactly how to highly successfully survive. Actively being completely, violently consumed, completely by you and your highly massive life. I profoundly knew exactly what would violently happen. Highly toxic headlines, aggressive cameras, highly complex contracts, highly brutal negotiations. They would tragically grow completely up entirely under a highly toxic, massive microscope. And I absolutely could not highly maliciously do exactly that completely to them, nor completely to you. You were actively standing perfectly on the highly absolute edge, entirely of absolutely something completely enormous, Aiden. I vividly saw you highly aggressively climb so incredibly far, so incredibly fast, and I absolutely did not desperately want to actively be the highly pathetic dead weight that violently slowed you completely down. He incredibly slowly shook his handsome head, highly desperately attempting to successfully absorb absolutely all of it. You were absolutely never, ever a highly pathetic dead weight. You were officially the absolute, only highly genuine part, entirely of my entire life, that absolutely did not physically feel completely, highly fabricated. And you absolutely didn't even highly generously give me the highly fair opportunity entirely to fiercely choose. Her highly beautiful expression violently cracked incredibly slightly. The highly soft corners entirely of her beautiful mouth violently tensed. I absolutely did not desperately want to actively be a highly toxic burden entirely to you. I fiercely wanted to fiercely protect them. And perhaps, yes, perhaps I absolutely also highly desperately wanted to fiercely protect completely myself. He confidently paced exactly once, then smoothly turned directly toward her completely, with his piercing eyes brilliantly burning. You fiercely protected them completely by highly maliciously keeping them completely away, entirely from their true father. I fiercely protected them completely from violently becoming a highly toxic story. She violently snapped completely with her beautiful voice aggressively rising. From actively being highly illegally bought and highly toxically sold completely by the highly sleazy tabloids. From actively being highly maliciously utilized exactly as highly toxic leverage completely by highly ruthless people who absolutely only fiercely care a single bit entirely about your massive company. Do absolutely not highly arrogantly think that I absolutely did not highly agonizingly deeply think entirely about exactly what I was highly actively doing absolutely every single agonizing day, completely during the absolute last 3 agonizing years. A highly long, deafening silence violently followed. Absolutely neither, entirely of them, violently tore their piercing gaze completely away. It was a highly specific kind, entirely of heavy silence, that absolutely only confidently comes completely from exactly 2 highly complex people who had exactly once intimately known absolutely every single highly microscopic detail entirely of absolutely each other. And exactly now literally could not vividly recognize the highly massive parts that had completely, violently changed. Finally, the deep voice entirely of Aiden beautifully softened. You absolutely do not desperately need to highly pathetically justify exactly what you violently did, Scarlett. Absolutely not exactly now. But I highly desperately need to explicitly know exactly one highly massive thing. She highly anxiously waited completely with highly tense shoulders. Do they profoundly know exactly who I truly am? She violently swallowed incredibly hard. They profoundly know that they officially possess a true dad, a highly good, true man. Absolutely someone whom I absolutely was not completely ready, entirely, to highly confidently bring directly into their highly fragile world, completely until I was completely, 100%, absolutely sure that they were absolutely also completely ready. Aiden nodded fiercely, incredibly slowly. There was massive pain entirely in his piercing eyes, but absolutely also, absolutely something completely else. Absolute resolution. Well, he stated incredibly quietly, I am officially right perfectly here, exactly now. And I am absolutely not actively going to violently go absolutely anywhere. Scarlett absolutely did not actively respond. But absolutely, something highly massive violently changed entirely in her beautiful face. A highly brief flash, entirely, of pure incredulity. Perhaps absolutely even highly pure hope. She highly gently turned incredibly slightly, intensely looking completely through the large window directly toward the highly messy table exactly where the innocent children were absolutely still peacefully sitting, completely, utterly unaware that the highly solid axis entirely of their massive world had literally, just highly aggressively, begun to completely, violently change. When she intensely looked directly at him completely again, her beautiful voice was literally barely a highly fragile whisper. I honestly do not completely know exactly how to highly successfully generously let you completely in, Aiden. Then, generously, let me miraculously figure it completely out, completely with you, he stated firmly. And entirely for the absolute first time, completely since she had completely, violently walked completely away entirely from him. She absolutely did not frantically run. Aiden decided to stay and be a father. Do you think Scarlett should make it easy for him, or does he need to prove himself? Tell us your thoughts. The first steps, the absolute next highly bright morning, Aiden literally could not highly successfully concentrate entirely on absolutely anything. His expensive phone violently vibrated completely with highly urgent meeting reminders. Highly critical emails aggressively accumulated, completely unanswered. And his highly elite assistant highly frantically called exactly twice, entirely to highly urgently ask exactly if he would highly actively join the highly massive board call. But he completely, violently ignored absolutely all entirely of them. His highly brilliant thoughts were absolutely still perfectly outside exactly that highly small, cheap restaurant. Absolutely still confidently standing perfectly on the freezing sidewalk, perfectly in front, entirely of Scarlett. Absolutely still completely trapped, entirely in the highly heavy silence that violently followed the absolute truth. For a highly powerful man, who highly routinely made highly massive decisions, entirely, in highly rapid seconds, who highly successfully negotiated multi-billion-dollar massive deals completely before highly expensive breakfast. He exactly now highly surprisingly found completely himself, completely, violently trapped, entirely in massive hesitation. Completely, utterly unsure, entirely, of exactly how to successfully take absolutely even the highly anticipated, next highly simple step. He absolutely no longer profoundly knew exactly what the highly strict rules absolutely were. He officially possessed biological sons. Exactly 3 innocent boys. His biological sons. And he had completely, violently missed absolutely everything. Their absolute first, highly wobbly steps. Their absolute first, highly precious words. Their absolute first, highly festive birthdays. Absolutely everything was completely gone. Violently stuffed completely into agonizing years that he absolutely could not miraculously recover. The highly terrifying thought completely, violently emptied him entirely in a highly specific way that absolutely terrified him. Absolutely not entirely because he profoundly felt highly toxic guilt, but entirely because he profoundly realized exactly how incredibly, massively, much he highly desperately wanted absolutely something he had absolutely never, ever actively imagined completely before. He absolutely did not entirely just fiercely want to explicitly know them. He fiercely wanted to explicitly know them. To absolutely belong completely to them entirely. In a highly beautiful way that officially possessed absolutely nothing highly massive to actively do completely with cold money or highly arrogant legacy or highly famous names. First highly early thing entirely. In the beautiful afternoon, He heavily returned directly to his highly expensive car, highly silently parked exactly one short block, completely away entirely from the highly modest, cheap apartment building entirely of Scarlett. It absolutely wasn't entirely in a highly terrible, dangerous area. But it was incredibly, highly clear that she had highly actively chosen absolute simplicity, absolute privacy, absolute security. He had absolutely not explicitly told her he would confidently come. A highly massive part entirely of him profoundly knew that she might highly possibly absolutely not smoothly open the heavy door. But he highly desperately needed to vividly see them completely again. Absolutely, even completely, from the highly safe distance. When he vividly saw her confidently step completely out, completely with the innocent children highly warmly bundled, completely up, entirely in highly light jackets, his heavy breath completely, violently caught. They were absolutely all highly tightly holding soft hands, a highly barely organized beautiful chaos, happily chatting completely among absolutely themselves, enthusiastically pointing directly at highly active birds, highly colorful leaves, the highly bright sky. Scarlett vividly saw him completely immediately. She absolutely did not visually seem incredibly surprised. She violently hesitated, then, confidently, walked directly toward him. Her highly deliberate step incredibly slow and highly careful. The innocent children happily followed her exactly like highly adorable little ducklings. Exactly two highly playfully pulling completely on her soft arms. And the absolute third highly happily lagging completely behind. Completely distracted entirely by a highly interesting stick he had successfully found. "We are actively going directly to the highly beautiful park," she stated exactly when she successfully reached him. Her beautiful voice was highly neutral, but absolutely not freezing cold. "You can highly happily walk completely with us exactly if you fiercely want." He nodded fiercely, highly desperately attempting to miraculously contain the highly massive gratitude that violently erupted entirely in his broad chest. "I would highly absolutely love exactly that." They peacefully walked completely together entirely in a highly awkward, tense silence, completely at absolute first. The innocent children enthusiastically ran completely ahead, highly playfully chasing absolutely each other. Aiden intensely watched them exactly like absolutely someone, actively seeing highly pure magic beautifully unfold. Absolutely every single highly energetic movement they highly actively made, physically felt completely surreal. Completely to him. He had completely, violently missed so incredibly, highly much. Finally, exactly one entirely of the highly energetic children. The absolute smallest, exactly one, violently fell completely down. Scarlett confidently stepped completely forward, but Aiden was significantly faster. He smoothly knelt completely down, highly gently, carefully checking the incredibly tiny hands entirely of the innocent child, entirely for highly painful scratches. "Hello," Aiden stated incredibly softly, gently brushing the highly dirty dirt completely away. "Are you perfectly okay, my highly brave little friend?" The innocent child intensely looked directly at him completely, with highly massive, brilliantly bright eyes. "I absolutely am not a highly pathetic little friend," he stated completely with a highly adorable pout. "I am officially Liam." Aiden completely, violently froze. Scarlett beautifully smiled, incredibly weakly, completely from directly behind. "Exactly that is officially Liam," she softly confirmed. "Jake is officially the exact one entirely in bright red. And Sam is officially the exact one who absolutely never, ever actively listens." Aiden physically felt absolutely something violently move completely in his heavy chest. "Hello, Liam," he stated completely again, significantly softer exactly now. I am officially your true dad." The innocent child gently tilted his tiny head. "Seriously?" He nodded fiercely. "Yes, highly, seriously." Aiden remained highly safely crouched, incredibly long. Completely after Liam enthusiastically ran completely forward. Scarlett was perfectly at his broad side exactly now. Her beautiful expression completely indecipherable. But her soft arms were absolutely no longer highly aggressively crossed. She absolutely did not actively speak. And absolutely neither did he. It absolutely wasn't highly necessary. He profoundly felt it entirely in the highly heavy silence perfectly between them. Absolutely something highly beautiful actively beginning completely anew. Aiden just met his sons and had a magical moment with Liam. Do you think the other boys will accept him as quickly? Tell us below. Building a new foundation, back completely at the highly modest apartment, she highly surprisingly invited him completely up, absolutely not entirely for a highly tense conversation, absolutely not entirely to highly aggressively clarify absolutely anything, but entirely because the highly enthusiastic children highly desperately wanted to proudly show him their highly massive superhero wall. A highly chaotic, beautiful collage entirely of highly creative drawings, highly colorful stickers, and highly messy crayon chaos, highly aggressively taped completely to their highly small bedroom wall. He confidently followed completely inside, highly desperately attempting to completely, utterly absorb absolutely every single highly precious moment. Absolutely every single highly microscopic detail. Their beautiful voices, their highly chaotic routines, the highly beautiful way that absolutely each exactly one highly instinctively hugged her completely, without absolutely even actively thinking entirely about it, as he stood perfectly entirely in the absolute middle entirely of their highly beautiful world. Completely with highly cheap toys, carelessly scattered completely around his highly expensive shoes, and highly pure laughter loudly resonating completely from the highly narrow hallway. Aiden profoundly realized absolutely something completely terrifying and incredibly beautiful completely at the exact same highly magical time. He absolutely did not fiercely want to actively be a highly pathetic visitor entirely in their beautiful lives. He desperately wanted to permanently stay. Aiden aggressively began to highly consistently appear absolutely every single beautiful day. Although absolutely never, ever, completely without actively being highly politely invited. He highly respectfully sent a highly polite text message completely to Scarlett, absolutely first. Absolutely always highly politely asking. Absolutely never, ever highly arrogantly assuming. And absolutely every single highly precious time she smoothly responded, completely with a highly simple yes, or a highly short, polite answer. She highly generously left the heavy door exactly a highly tiny bit, significantly more, completely open. The innocent children absolutely did not highly actively question his highly sudden, massive presence entirely in their beautiful lives. Highly innocent children absolutely do not successfully possess the highly toxic doubts that highly cynical adults officially possess. They highly happily accepted him entirely in the highly exact same, beautiful way they highly happily accepted absolutely everything, completely else, entirely, in their massive world. Completely with a highly open, pure curiosity. and a highly specific kind, entirely of absolute honesty, that highly successfully made Aiden profoundly feel exactly as if he were highly actively relearning exactly how to successfully live completely from absolute scratch. He highly successfully learned that Liam fiercely loved highly massive dinosaurs, that Sam could highly effortlessly name absolutely every single highly massive planet entirely in the highly complex solar system, and that Jake officially possessed a highly quiet, sensitive side, but highly beautifully animated exactly when, absolutely, someone highly genuinely, intensely listened completely to him. At absolute first, they highly casually called him Aiden, which violently hurt him significantly more than he highly bravely let completely show. He absolutely never, ever highly aggressively corrected them. He absolutely did not desperately want to highly toxically force absolutely anything. But exactly one highly rainy afternoon, completely after happily helping Sam meticulously build a highly massive spaceship completely with highly cheap cardboard boxes entirely in the small living room, Jake sat peacefully perfectly next, completely to him, smoothly leaned completely in, and stated incredibly quietly, "Are you actively going to successfully be my true dad exactly now?" The highly innocent question violently hit him significantly harder than absolutely any highly toxic ambush entirely in a highly ruthless boardroom. He intensely looked directly into the highly serious, piercing blue eyes entirely of Jake, and honestly replied entirely in the absolute only highly genuine way he highly possibly could. "If you highly fiercely want me entirely to absolutely be exactly one." Jake nodded fiercely and explicitly said absolutely nothing significantly more. But significantly later, exactly that highly specific night, absolutely all highly energetic 3 children aggressively began to happily call him Dad, completely without highly polite ceremony, completely without highly advance warning, absolutely just a highly massive, beautiful shift. Exactly as incredibly simple and highly profound, exactly as highly smoothly turning a crisp page. Scarlett intensely watched absolutely all entirely of it completely, in absolute silence. She absolutely still fiercely maintained her highly safe distance, absolutely not completely emotionally cold, but highly, incredibly hesitant. She had highly agonizingly spent agonizing years highly meticulously building highly impenetrable walls completely around herself and her beautiful children. Highly massive walls that fiercely protected them completely from a highly toxic world that she had exactly once highly genuinely believed could completely, violently destroy them. Now, exactly that highly massive world was actively in her highly small living room, happily making highly delicious peanut butter sandwiches and highly meticulously fixing highly broken cheap toy trucks completely with highly cheap tape and absolute determination. The highly beautiful following weeks miraculously became a highly quiet, absolute transformation that absolutely neither entirely of them had highly actively expected. Aiden miraculously became an absolute, highly integral part entirely of their highly chaotic daily lives. Absolutely not completely with highly grand, pathetic gestures or highly dramatic, toxic declarations, but entirely in highly small, incredibly deliberate, beautiful ways. Titi aggressively began to confidently arrive exactly early enough, entirely to highly happily help the energetic children meticulously prepare entirely for busy school. And he highly happily stayed exactly late enough, entirely to happily read highly entertaining bedtime stories, completely before deep sleep. Absolutely even exactly when highly exhausting corporate work highly aggressively demanded his highly intense attention, completely elsewhere. He absolutely did not highly pathetically attempt to highly expensively buy their highly pure affection. He absolutely did not highly arrogantly overwhelm them completely with highly expensive gifts or highly flashy toxic distractions. He simply highly consistently showed completely up, completely over, and completely over, completely again. Completely with a highly quiet, unbreakable consistency. Exactly as if absolutely every single highly precious moment was a highly fragile opportunity entirely to miraculously recover a highly tiny piece entirely of the highly massive time he had violently lost. Scarlett intensely observed absolutely everything completely with a highly cautious, fragile heart. She highly desperately wanted to genuinely believe that the exact man who highly meticulously folded incredibly tiny, cheap socks entirely on her highly worn sofa, and highly enthusiastically built, highly complex Lego castles entirely in the highly messy living room, was exactly the exact same Aiden she had exactly once fiercely loved, but completely different entirely in absolutely all the highly correct, beautiful ways. However, the blinding fear absolutely never, ever, completely, permanently abandoned her. She had highly agonizingly spent exactly 3 agonizing years actively doing absolutely everything completely alone. Every single highly terrifying tantrum, every single highly expensive doctor's visit, every single highly impossible, massive decision. Exactly that had miraculously made her incredibly strong. But it had absolutely also highly meticulously built, highly impenetrable walls, so incredibly high that she absolutely couldn't absolutely always highly clearly tell exactly if they were fiercely protecting her or completely, violently isolating her. Aiden is proving himself by doing small things for the family. What do you think is the best way to show someone you've changed? Tell us below. The vulnerability, one highly quiet night, exactly as the highly freezing autumn rapidly approached, and the heavy air violently became incredibly crisp. Scarlett successfully found completely herself, peacefully sitting entirely on the highly cold porch steps, completely with a highly warm blanket perfectly over her fragile shoulders. Aiden peacefully sat perfectly next, completely to her, his strong elbows heavily resting perfectly on his strong knees. His highly expensive dress shirt highly casually rolled completely up, incredibly calm and highly comfortable entirely, in the highly specific kind, entirely of highly chaotic domestic environment that would have exactly once physically seemed completely alien entirely to him, entirely too. They highly enthusiastically talk entirely about you absolutely all the highly massive time, exactly now, she softly stated completely after a highly long profound silence. Even exactly when you are absolutely not actively perfectly here. He intensely looked directly at her, his handsome expression completely indecipherable. What exactly do they explicitly say? She beautifully smiled incredibly softly. Liam highly explicitly says that your deep voice violently sounds exactly like Batman. Jake highly genuinely believes that you can miraculously fix absolutely anything. Sam highly curiously asked me exactly if you profoundly know exactly how to successfully fly a highly massive airplane entirely because, I highly accurately quote, he is incredibly rich And highly rich people actively do exactly those highly massive things. Aiden laughed loudly, but there was highly profound emotion completely behind it. They are completely, utterly incredible. They absolutely are, she firmly stated. And they are officially mine. Every single highly precious breath, every single highly painful scar, every single highly microscopic inch entirely of them. I absolutely did not highly flawlessly do it completely to absolute perfection, but I aggressively did it completely with absolutely everything I highly successfully possessed. He fiercely nodded incredibly solemnly. I profoundly know exactly that, exactly now. And I absolutely never, ever highly toxically doubted it. Even exactly when I was violently angry. Even exactly when I absolutely did not completely understand exactly why you frantically fled. I profoundly knew that you were highly actively doing exactly what you highly genuinely believed was completely 100% right. The piercing eyes entirely of Scarlet brilliantly shone entirely in the highly dim, soft light. I absolutely still do not completely know exactly if it absolutely was. I absolutely only profoundly knew that I absolutely could not highly possibly raise them entirely in your highly toxic world. Or perhaps I absolutely did not profoundly know exactly how entirely to successfully do it. Aiden confidently sat significantly straighter, his deep voice incredibly low, but highly, absolutely firm. Then, let's highly aggressively build a highly brand new exactly one. Absolutely not mine. Absolutely not yours. Ours. Exactly one entirely, in which they can highly happily grow completely up completely without desperately needing to violently unlearn exactly who they truly are. She intensely looked directly at him entirely for a highly incredibly long massive time. Her soft fingers highly aggressively tightening completely around the highly frayed edges entirely of her warm blanket. I absolutely do not desperately want to fiercely raise them completely with absolutely someone who could highly possibly violently leave exactly when. Highly massive things highly aggressively get incredibly difficult. I confidently walked completely away completely from absolutely everything, completely except entirely from you, he stated firmly. The absolute only highly massive thing that I highly agonizingly regretted violently losing was exactly what we beautifully had. And exactly now them. You. Exactly this. I am absolutely not actively going to violently leave. No. This highly specific time. It was officially the absolute most highly vulnerable massive thing she had absolutely ever clearly heard him explicitly say. And it completely, violently broke absolutely something highly massive completely inside her that exact night. Completely after the innocent children peacefully fell deeply asleep, and the highly quiet house violently went completely silent. She highly gently handed him a highly folded, cheap piece entirely of paper. Securely on it were officially the highly official birth certificates entirely of the innocent children. His highly specific name absolutely was not perfectly on the highly official list. Completely up. Completely until exactly now it absolutely had not officially been. I am completely ready entirely for them to explicitly know exactly who their true father highly legally is, she whispered incredibly softly. Highly legally. Completely. Absolutely not entirely, just completely, in the highly beautiful stories. Aiden intensely looked directly at the highly cheap paper, entirely for a highly incredibly long, massive time. Completely overwhelmed entirely by the massive, crushing weight entirely of exactly what it explicitly meant. This absolutely wasn't entirely just entirely about true paternity. It was entirely about absolute forgiveness, entirely about pure trust, entirely about actively being highly officially invited completely into a highly sacred space that had exactly once absolutely been completely, violently closed directly to him. He intensely looked completely back directly at her, his deep voice incredibly soft, but highly sure. "Thank you so incredibly much." Scarlett nodded fiercely, and entirely for the absolute first time. There was absolutely zero highly toxic hesitation entirely in her piercing eyes. Exactly now. They were actively, highly aggressively building absolutely something. Absolutely not, highly pathetically, starting completely over. Because exactly what they beautifully had, completely before, was completely, permanently, but exactly what highly miraculously waited completely for them was absolutely something highly brand new. Absolutely something that absolutely neither entirely of them had highly actively imagined that they would highly successfully possess. A highly beautiful, fragile, second chance. And it was completely, 100%, absolutely worth every single highly difficult conversation, every single highly painful scar, every single highly silent, beautiful night. Scarlett finally put Aiden's name on the birth certificates. What do you think is the biggest sign of trust in a relationship? Let us know below. The true father. The highly complex legal process smoothly moved significantly slower than Aiden highly impatiently expected. But he absolutely did not highly toxically complain. Every single highly boring meeting completely with the elite lawyer, every single highly official signature, every single highly intrusive background check, absolutely all entirely of it, physically felt exactly like highly solid steps directly toward absolutely something incredibly solid. Absolutely something that absolutely could not be violently snatched completely away entirely from him. This highly specific time. He peacefully sat completely through absolutely every single exactly one, completely, with a highly specific kind entirely of highly quiet reverence. Exactly as if the highly complex paper trail finally, beautifully matched the absolute truth that he had highly miraculously come to profoundly feel completely in his strong bones. He was officially their true father, and absolutely not entirely only completely in highly pathetic memory or highly cold biology, but entirely in absolute presence, in highly absolute choice, in absolutely every single highly chaotic morning that he highly happily helped them successfully dress, and absolutely every single highly quiet night that he highly patiently stayed entirely to happily read completely until they peacefully fell deeply asleep. Scarlett intensely observed the highly massive transformation completely in absolute silence. Absolutely, still highly insecure, entirely of exactly. How to highly accurately label. Exactly what was highly actively happening completely between them. They absolutely did not magically return to actively being a highly official couple. Absolutely not. Highly officially. There was absolutely no highly romantic kiss, nor highly dramatic romantic declarations. But Aiden was entirely in her small house, miraculously, almost absolutely, every single beautiful day. He profoundly knew exactly where the highly cheap cereal officially was, exactly which innocent child highly desperately needed their highly soft blanket to absolutely be completely warmed entirely in the highly loud dryer, completely, before peacefully going completely to bed. And exactly one, absolutely still violently woke completely up, completely with highly terrifying nightmares. He highly meticulously folded the highly clean laundry entirely, while she highly efficiently handled the highly urgent corporate emails. He happily learned to beautifully make highly delicious pancakes, completely with highly adorable smiley faces. And exactly once he absolutely even highly clumsily braided the beautiful hair entirely of Scarlett, completely in the highly chaotic madness entirely of the early dawn. Exactly when? Exactly one entirely of the innocent children innocently asked, "Why exactly doesn't Mommy highly happily possess a highly fun turn completely too?" One highly quiet night, completely after a highly incredibly long, exhausting day. The innocent children peacefully went completely to bed incredibly early, and a highly rare, beautiful silence completely took absolute control entirely of the small house. Aiden was peacefully entirely on the highly quiet porch, completely again. This highly specific time completely with a highly thick notebook, completely open perfectly on his strong lap. Scarlett confidently stepped completely out, completely with exactly 2 hot cups, entirely of cheap tea. Exactly one entirely, of which she highly gently handed directly to him, completely without a single heavy word. He highly gratefully took it, completely surprised completely by the highly beautiful gesture, and intensely looked directly at her completely with a highly exhausted but incredibly grateful expression. "What exactly is exactly that?" she softly asked, gently pointing directly at the heavy notebook. He violently hesitated completely before softly responding. Beautiful names entirely for the highly massive trust fund that I am highly actively creating. Absolutely not entirely just completely for them. Entirely for completely others, exactly like them. Innocent children highly bravely raised, completely by highly strong, fierce mothers, who highly miraculously did it absolutely all completely alone. Scarlett highly surprisingly did not actively respond completely at absolute first. She slowly sipped her hot tea and intensely looked directly at the highly quiet street. "I absolutely never, ever fiercely wanted your massive money," she finally stated incredibly softly. "I completely know," he smoothly replied. "Exactly. That is exactly why I highly desperately want to highly generously give it." She intensely looked directly at him, exactly then. And there was a highly profound silence that beautifully passed perfectly between them. The highly specific kind, completely full, entirely of highly massive meaning, but absolutely not completely of highly absolute resolution, completely yet. She absolutely still did not completely know exactly what to successfully do, completely with absolutely all. Entirely of exactly that. Completely with exactly how incredibly present he had miraculously become. How incredibly gentle. How incredibly different. She highly desperately wanted to genuinely believe that exactly this absolutely wasn't highly temporary. That it absolutely wasn't a highly toxic overcorrection, highly maliciously fueled completely by highly pathetic guilt. But a highly terrifying voice completely deep, entirely inside her, absolutely still, highly aggressively, warned her entirely to absolutely be incredibly careful. "Why exactly are you officially right here, highly, truly, Aiden?" she highly abruptly asked. "Is it absolutely only entirely for the innocent children?" He absolutely did not actively respond completely immediately. He smoothly closed the heavy notebook, gently set it completely aside, and smoothly turned entirely to intensely look directly at her, completely fully. "No," he firmly stated. "It highly beautifully began completely with them, but it absolutely is not entirely just completely them. It is absolutely you completely too." Scarlett incredibly slowly exhaled, her fragile heart violently beating entirely in a highly specific way that physically felt entirely at once highly incredibly old and highly unusual. "I honestly do not completely know exactly if I can highly possibly successfully go completely through, violently losing you completely again," she honestly admitted. "If I highly generously let exactly this confidently go way too incredibly far, and it completely violently falls completely apart, it absolutely won't entirely just violently hurt me. It will violently hurt them completely too. I am absolutely not actively asking you to highly blindly jump," he stated incredibly softly. "Absolutely only entirely to confidently walk perfectly by my broad side. And exactly if I absolutely cannot, then I will highly stubbornly continue actively walking absolutely anyway, completely with or completely without the highly elite title, or the highly official label, or absolutely anything completely else. I will absolutely be right perfectly here, because exactly here is exactly where I absolutely should have highly perfectly been the absolute entire massive time." Her dry throat violently tightened. He absolutely wasn't highly actively attempting to miraculously win her completely over. He absolutely wasn't even highly actively attempting to highly maliciously persuade her. He was absolutely just explicitly telling the absolute truth that exact night. She absolutely did not highly politely ask him to safely leave. And exactly when he peacefully stayed deeply sleeping entirely on the highly cheap sofa, heavily wrapped completely in exactly one entirely of the highly colorful superhero blankets, entirely of the innocent children. It absolutely wasn't entirely because he actively had to, or entirely because he highly aggressively insisted. It was entirely because incredibly slowly and highly quietly, he was actively, miraculously, becoming a highly warm home. The promise kept. The highly freezing winter aggressively arrived incredibly softly, exactly that highly specific year, beautifully bringing highly early pitch-black darkness and highly quiet, beautiful mornings, heavily covered entirely in bright frost. The innocent children were absolutely already highly sufficiently old enough entirely to highly astutely notice the highly massive change entirely in the freezing air, to highly enthusiastically get incredibly excited, completely with warm coats and thick gloves, and the highly magical promise, entirely, of freezing snow. Scarlett highly surprisingly found completely herself, intensely observing them, significantly more than highly usual. The highly beautiful way they enthusiastically ran directly into the strong arms, entirely of Aiden, the absolute, precise moment he confidently entered, completely through the heavy door. The highly beautiful way they highly instinctively leaned completely against him, exactly as if they had absolutely always profoundly known that he would absolutely always be perfectly there. Sometimes it absolutely still completely, violently, took her completely by massive surprise. Exactly how highly natural it visually looked, exactly how highly simple. But there was absolutely nothing highly simple, entirely and exactly what it highly aggressively took, entirely to successfully arrive perfectly there. She had highly meticulously built exactly this beautiful life, exactly brick, completely by highly heavy brick, completely with her absolute own soft hands. And somehow, completely without highly polite warning, Aiden had highly miraculously re-entered directly into it and had miraculously become an absolute, integral part entirely of the highly solid foundation. One highly magical night, perfectly near the highly festive holidays, the small house violently buzzed completely with highly vibrant energy. The innocent children happily helped beautifully decorate a highly small, cheap tree that Scarlett had highly happily bought entirely at the absolute beginning, entirely of the busy week. Absolutely each exactly one, entirely of them highly enthusiastically arguing entirely about exactly who would highly proudly hang exactly which highly beautiful ornament. Aiden peacefully sat entirely on the hard floor, perfectly completely between them, smiling radiantly, completely through the highly beautiful chaos, highly patiently untangling a highly massive string entirely of bright lights that officially possessed absolutely zero highly polite intention, entirely of actively cooperating. Scarlett confidently stood perfectly in the heavy doorframe, completely with a hot cup securely in her soft hands, intensely observing the highly beautiful scene, highly generously permitting completely herself entirely to profoundly feel the massive, crushing weight and the highly beautiful warmth entirely of it. Significantly later, completely after the innocent children finally peacefully fell deeply asleep, and the small house was completely left entirely in exactly that highly rare kind, entirely of beautiful calm that absolutely only beautifully arrives completely after a completely full and incredibly happy day. Aiden miraculously found her peacefully sitting entirely on the absolute edge, entirely of the massive bed, entirely in which she absolutely used to highly pathetically sleep, completely alone. She absolutely did not actively speak exactly when he confidently entered. She simply intensely looked directly at him, her piercing eyes incredibly soft, but highly cautious, absolutely still, highly actively asking a highly massive question that he had absolutely not completely answered completely entirely. He confidently crossed the small room and sat heavily, perfectly next, completely to her. Exactly close enough entirely to physically feel the highly warm heat entirely of her flawless skin, but absolutely not exactly close enough entirely to actively touch her. You absolutely do not desperately need to explicitly say absolutely anything, he stated incredibly softly. But I highly genuinely think that I absolutely should. She intensely looked directly at him, highly anxiously waiting. I absolutely did not confidently return entirely to miraculously fix the highly toxic past, he stated. I absolutely cannot. I violently lost way too incredibly much highly precious time, and I will absolutely never, ever miraculously recover it. But I can absolutely be perfectly here, right exactly now. And I fiercely want to absolutely be completely here, entirely for you, entirely for them, in exactly the highly specific way that you highly generously permit me, completely without highly toxic pressure, completely without highly strict deadlines, absolutely only the absolute truth. Scarlett intensely looked completely down, entirely at her soft hands, entirely, for a highly, incredibly long, massive moment completely before bravely speaking. You profoundly know that I absolutely used to beautifully dream entirely about exactly this. Entirely about you confidently returning, but entirely in the highly pathetic dream. I was violently angry. I violently screamed. I actively made you highly aggressively earn it. He beautifully smiled incredibly softly. Exactly that visually seems completely fair. But exactly now that you are actively here, she aggressively continued. Absolutely all that I profoundly feel is massive exhaustion. Completely tired, entirely, of highly desperately holding absolutely everything completely on my absolute own. Completely tired, entirely, of actively being completely terrified, entirely, of highly desperately needing absolutely someone. You absolutely do not desperately need to actively be completely terrified, he stated incredibly softly. Desperately needing absolutely someone absolutely does not magically make me incredibly weak. It highly actively makes me incredibly vulnerable. And then absolutely be incredibly vulnerable, he stated entirely in a highly fragile whisper. Completely with me. She intensely looked directly at him. Genuinely, truly looked entirely at him. And vividly saw absolutely not the exact highly arrogant man completely from whom she had exactly once frantically fled, but the true man who had confidently returned and completely, permanently, stayed. The exact true man who highly clumsily braided beautiful hair completely with highly clumsy fingers, who enthusiastically read highly entertaining bedtime stories completely with way too incredibly much highly dramatic expression, who lovingly kissed highly painful scraped knees and meticulously tied incredibly tiny shoes completely without highly arrogantly expecting absolutely any highly loud applause. The true man who had miraculously changed absolutely not entirely because she highly aggressively asked him to, but entirely because absolute life had highly violently demanded it entirely of him, and he had highly bravely chosen to beautifully grow. She slowly approached exactly then, her soft hand highly gently resting perfectly, beautifully entirely on his. I absolutely do not desperately want to actively do exactly this, completely alone, absolutely never, ever, completely again, she whispered incredibly softly. You will absolutely never, ever, highly actively have to actively do it completely alone, he firmly replied. They absolutely did not passionately kiss. No. Exactly that highly magical night absolutely was not entirely about exactly that. It was entirely about the highly beautiful way her delicate head softly rested perfectly on his broad shoulder, exactly short moments, significantly later. The highly beautiful way his strong hand miraculously found absolutely hers, and absolutely did not violently let completely go. The highly beautiful way that the highly quiet silence perfectly between them was absolutely no longer highly toxic silence, but absolute, pure peace. The highly beautiful weeks seamlessly passed. The highly complex paperwork was completely, flawlessly finalized. The highly powerful name entirely of Aiden was highly legally and completely, permanently, beautifully written, perfectly right, perfectly. Next, completely, to absolutely theirs. He highly happily moved completely into a highly small, cozy house, exactly 2 short blocks, completely away, highly generously giving massive space completely to Scarlett, but absolutely never, ever, way too incredibly much. They beautifully co-parented completely with highly easy grace, completely with highly pure warmth, completely with loud laughter, and incredibly slowly, the highly pure love that had exactly once absolutely been deeply buried, completely under agonizing years, entirely of massive pain and highly toxic distance, aggressively began to beautifully take highly deep root completely anew. Highly real, exactly this highly specific time. Significantly, infinitely, stronger. Entirely, 'cause completely of absolutely everything that it had highly miraculously survived. One highly quiet, beautiful Sunday morning. Exactly while the freezing snow beautifully fell completely outside, and the innocent children happily curled completely up, perfectly, completely between them, entirely on the comfortable sofa, completely, with the highly colorful cartoons loudly playing completely low, entirely on the bright screen. Scarlett intensely looked directly at Aiden, and absolutely did not vividly see the highly toxic man he had absolutely been, or the highly catastrophic mistakes he had violently made. She vividly saw the true man who peacefully stayed. The true man who confidently showed completely up. The true man who, completely against absolutely all highly impossible odds, and completely after absolutely every single highly violent storm, had completely, beautifully returned completely home. What an absolutely incredible, breathtaking journey of redemption and true love. Did you cry when Aiden finally became a real father? Do you believe people can truly change for the better? Drop your highly emotional thoughts in the comments below. Please don't forget to smash that like button, share this beautiful story of second chances, and subscribe to our channel for more explosive, satisfying stories. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.